Maggie, so excited to have you. Maggie Stewart is an experienced attorney admitted to the State Bar of California and the Nova Scotia Bar in Canada. She has been an attorney for over 15 years and founded Mundial Law in 2016. So she focuses on providing concierge legal services, primarily in the field of entertainment and immigration, with an emphasis on Canadian law. So this is going to be super exciting. In addition to immigration services, her firm also handles passport renewals, legal name changes, restraining orders, and other matters that require unique professional and confidential care. And for anyone in here who has toured or is wanting to tour, you've dealt with the Canadian border at some point, I am sure. And so I think there are going to be some really cool questions. Ask anything that comes to mind. Maggie, so excited to have you. Thank you.
Nikki, thank you so much for this really wonderful opportunity and for the introduction, and just a big shout out to what you've built here. I had the pleasure of coming to an event in LA. It seems like just like a few weeks ago. I guess it was before Christmas though. So time flies. I've had a great time meeting other people on your team. So big shout out to Ginny, who I've been working with closely to get here. But you've got lots of great people with you. So congratulations
Yes.
on that.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to dive in because I was told I got 30 minutes and I'm going to use them. I'm setting my timer so that I don't overtalk, because also people who know me know I'm going to do that. As Chip said, the certainty of going to the border is that it's going to be uncertain. So I'm really glad to be here and glad to have lots of people here to hear what we're saying about going to Canada. We're going to mostly be focusing on people who have issues with admissibility, so people who have criminal convictions in their history. But we also can talk a little bit about visas and work permits and things like that if that's of interest. Before I dive in, I will say, as most of you know, live performances, so music, theater, stand-up comedy, does not require a work permit in Canada, unlike the United States, actually. So people are going in to do live shows, enter based on their citizenship and based on whether they have any criminal conviction issues. U.S. citizens, and green card holders can drive in or fly in with just their passports. Everybody else needs something to be able to fly in, and people from what we call visa required countries require visas. So if this is something that's of interest to you, because maybe you work with a more international team, please do reach out. We've had a number of people who have had issues at the border because they just didn't know that their people couldn't drive in or that they needed special paperwork to fly in. I won't get too deep into the visa issues, but they are something that are significant and need to be talked about in advance. So that's that. Work permits also, real quick, they're not needed for live shows. They are needed for film, television, and commercial jobs. So if people are going into work on, especially if they're providing tech support on, say, conferences or private events that are not like live music shows, those may require work permits. They're not the same as touring into Canada for doing a touring music show. So I'm just going to flag those. I'm going to leave them for now. If that's something that you would talk about more, please reach out. Ginny's going to drop all my contact info. I'm happy to have a chat if you have any questions on those topics. But the topic of today is going to be inadmissibility, waivers. I like to say I specialize in getting criminals into Canada. Let me pull up the, here we go, slideshow. Is this visible? We're good?
Yeah, you're good.
Nice. Crushing it at technology today, guys. Don't get turned around at the border. Ta-da! So the focus today is going to be criminal inadmissibility, waivers and rehabilitation applications, and room for questions and asking for a friend. So we'll have room at the end to have any questions you may have. Ginny's going to monitor that. So what is criminal inadmissibility? So people are going to be barred from entering Canada for any reason, for any amount of time until they're rehabilitated. And so when a person becomes inadmissible for criminality on two occasions, one, when they have an actual conviction in court, or two, if they have pending charges. Okay, so people who have a DUI arrest and still going through court can and will be turned around at the border, even though they have not been convicted. Pending charges will operate like a conviction until they've been resolved. And in order to get in until a person is rehabilitated, and we'll talk in more detail about how you get about being rehabilitated, you need a famous waiver, which is strictly called a temporary resident permit, but people also call it a minister's permit or a waiver or a pass. There's two ways to get those. We'll discuss it in more detail, but one, the standard way is to apply in advance and be pre-cleared. The more risky way to do it, the less predictable way to do it, is to wait until you get to the border and try your luck. And I often tell people, do you want to be that guy on the bus that's spending an extra 3 hours at the border applying for something you could have applied for in advance? Typically, the answer is no. And then the real question is, well, how does Canada even know? So good news, bad news, Canada and the United States and a few other countries share criminal background information. And so Canada can see roughly what shows up on a person's FBI report. And I will tell you that what shows up on an FBI report is oftentimes not what you think will show up on an FBI report. It is oftentimes incomplete. It will oftentimes show arrests and not that a charge got dismissed or dropped. Like it will show, for example, if somebody got picked up after a fight with their girlfriend and the cops came and took them away and put them in the drunk tank overnight and then let them go in the morning, that will show an arrest for domestic violence. And that is something that people are very surprised for when they show up at the border, when immigration authorities ask them about that domestic violence charge from 2 years ago. And in this guy's head, he's like, I had a fight. The cops picked me up, let me go in the morning, never even stepped foot in court. So I always tell people, if you've ever been in a cop car, if you've ever been fingerprinted, you should really pull an FBI report and find out what might be in that report in advance. It costs $50. Ginny's going to pop up the link for a company that we like to use called Fieldprint, but there's lots of companies that can get your FBI report for you. So here we go. So as we said, convictions or pending charges of for an offense that would violate the laws of Canada. And Canada and the United States have very similar laws. So as you can expect, DUIs, reckless driving, possession of drugs, including, and we'll get into this in a minute, marijuana over 1 ounce. Just because Canada has legalized possession of marijuana for personal use, possession of marijuana over 1 ounce or 30 grams is still illegal in Canada, and so it will be illegal if you have a conviction for a larger amount. You will be inadmissible to come into Canada. Theft crimes, assault crimes, disturbing the peace, shoplifting. Canada does not distinguish between felonies and misdemeanors. And so we oftentimes hear people say, oh, well, I only have misdemeanors. I don't have any felonies. I shouldn't have any problems. That is false. It's not the case. What does not trigger inadmissibility? This is actually a very short list. Driving without a license, speeding, other minor traffic violations should not trigger inadmissibility. Although I will say speeding that amounts to like stunt driving, like reckless driving speeding, will trigger inadmissibility. Offenses with no conviction. So this is when there's no prosecution, sometimes called null prosequi or NP. Dismissals, acquittals. A conviction where there's a conditional dismissal. So sometimes people are sentenced to do probation, pay fines, go to courses, and then they're not actually convicted. Those should not trigger inadmissibility. But oftentimes the FBI report doesn't show that they weren't convicted. And that's where we get into confusion at the border, because people say I wasn't convicted, but they've got a DUI or something on their record. And then people who get post-conviction relief. So in some states, for example, I'm in California, after you've been convicted, you can apply to have that conviction dismissed or expunged. My word of warning on that is, one, different states have different processes. Expungement oftentimes just means that it's been hidden. It doesn't mean that the conviction has gone away. It's just that it's not visible on a background check for certain purposes. Even in states like California, where you can get a dismissal that does mean that the conviction has been overturned and that there's no longer a conviction on the record, Canada doesn't always respect that. They sometimes say, you know what, you got that dismissal too soon. And I will say, because we sometimes do work for Australia, Australia doesn't care. Australia will say we will take into account any conviction you've ever had, regardless of what happened after the fact. So I now generally tell people, unless you have another reason, like you want to be able, you want to open a business or get your gun rights back or other voting rights back, I tell people not to bother with expungements or dismissals. They don't carry a lot of weight for immigration purposes. They're usually not worth the effort. So Canada distinguishes between criminality and serious criminality for going into the country. Most things are going to fall into the category of criminality. A few things, usually the more serious crimes will fall into serious criminality, but it's based on what the sentencing in Canada is for a similar crime. And the one that is really needs to be flagged for people is that since 2018, the end of 2018, the punishment for DUIs in Canada was increased. And because the punishment in Canada was increased, all DUIs starting in 2019 are now considered serious criminality. It doesn't affect whether or not you can get a waiver to go into Canada, and it doesn't affect whether or not you can get rehabilitated. But it does mean that you are unlikely to get a waiver, a TRP, approved at the border, because average border agents do not have the authority to grant a waiver for serious criminality. Sometimes a manager will, but it really depends on who you get and whether they want to do that favor for you. So the impact of DUIs is becoming actually more serious for going to Canada because DUIs are now considered serious criminality. I would not risk going to the border with a DUI that took place after 2018 for this particular reason. Applying in advance, we can get them approved, but applying at the border, you run into it's a legal technicality, really, is that it's serious criminality, and most officers don't have the authority to approve a TRP at the border for that. So as we just were saying, the laws around DUIs changed. So since the end of December 2018, all DUIs are now considered serious criminality. But on the flip side, Canada legalized possession of cannabis for personal use in October 2018. And now if a person has been convicted of possession of under 1 ounce or under 30 grams of marijuana, that no longer will be considered a conviction that will stop you from getting into Canada. So this is great, but should be taken with a grain of sand, because it's not that any cannabis-related conviction is going to be okay, right? So a conviction for possession for the purpose of sale, which is going to be for sure an amount over 30 grams or 1 ounce, a conviction for trafficking marijuana, a conviction for any amount of marijuana over 1 ounce. And so in a lot of states, the smallest amount they can charge you with possession of is 2 ounces, right? So on the face of it, you've got a problem. So some people can take advantage of this, but I would not rely I wouldn't confuse this with all cannabis related convictions are not a problem anymore. I would still give anything related to marijuana that's on somebody's record a second pass and just be really sure that it is not going to trigger any issues at the border. So now that we've kind of set up what are all the problems you could have, which are, not a few, what can we do about it? Because ultimately, my job is to help people get into Canada smoothly. I have a great firm. We have a great staff. We're doing, hundreds of waiver applications and rehabilitation applications a year. And so our job is to make sure that we're applying in advance. I very rarely allow people to go to the border without an approved application, because going to the border with papers in your hand is always risky. There are just no guarantees. And at the very least, you're just going to tie up whoever you're traveling in with. I will say these laws apply the same whether you're flying in or driving in. There's no legal differentiation between them. If you hear that people have an easier time flying in, it's probably saying that they're having an easier time either going through secondary processing because they have more officers at the airport, or they're saying that they had an easier time sneaking in because the immigration officers weren't looking so hard at their background checks as they were going in. But so we're going to start with temporary resident permits, because that's really like the main thing. This is what gets people into Canada when they have convictions or pending charges in their history. We, like I said, file probably a couple hundred of these a year. We have about a 98 to 99% success rate. An application that's put together properly, that has the correct supporting documents, that explains the purpose of travel, that doesn't come up short on statements and character letters. Canada's interested in improving those. They want tours to go to Canada. They want good people to be able to go in working on tours. As difficult as they can be at the border, my experience with the consulate has been very good. So we submit the applications in advance, at least 2 weeks before travel at the consulate in Los Angeles. You can apply at the border, but like I was saying earlier, there are restrictions on approving applications with serious criminality. And sometimes they just won't, right? Sometimes they'll say, you've been told not to do this, or we don't want to deal with the kinds of convictions you have in your history. They'll just turn you around. So it's best to apply in advance when possible. An application, whether you're applying at the border or you're applying in advance, requires an FBI report at the very minimum, court records, proof of the purpose of travel, application forms, character letters, and other support material. You don't need an attorney to do it. You're certainly more than welcome to put it together yourself, but I would say the average person probably doesn't have the time or doesn't have the expertise to go and find these documents. Part of the benefit of hiring professionals to do it, and certainly I'm not the only one in town who's doing this kind of application, is to put it on to somebody else and let them run down the court records and prepare the forms and submit it and allow people to do their job. The application fee that's paid to the government for a temporary resident permit is $245 Canadian, so a little under $200 US right now. And temporary resident permits are exactly that. They are temporary. So they're valid usually from when you need to go in to the last date that you can prove that you need to be there. When we're working with clients, we try to stack several tours so that if they're going up with a couple different bands or they're going up on different projects, we like to say that they're going up from, say, May 1st for the first run, and then they're back in July, and then they're back in September, and their last date in Canada will be September 30th. And then they'll get a TRP that's valid from May 1st to September 30th. But if you come to them and you say, I just need to go up for this one thing, and it's 3 days, you may get a TRP that's only valid for 3 days. Generally speaking, they do not issue TRPs that are valid for more than the time you need to be there. We have some clients who we work with frequently, and they are going into Canada multiple times a year. And once we've filed a few applications, we might be able to get a 6-month TRP, or on the rare occasion, a 1-year TRP. But mostly you get the time that you said you needed to be there and not much more. Now, what we really aim for is rehabilitation. So rehabilitation is an application process that when the application is approved, people are cleared permanently for Canada. They get a letter that says you are no longer inadmissible. And that is what I call the golden ticket, because then you don't need waivers anymore. Then you don't have to do anything in advance. If there are any questions that come up at the border, you show them the letter and you're on your way, hopefully, usually. That's the point of it. You can apply for rehabilitation for any number of convictions. They can also be very serious. We've had successful rehabilitation applications for people who spent nearly a decade in jail for voluntary manslaughter, for example. So there's not any kind of conviction that's not, in theory, eligible to be rehabilitated, as long as they meet the criteria, and ultimately, as long as they can prove that they are indeed rehabilitated. So to become eligible to apply, you have to have been more than 5 years since completing all sentencing on all your charges. And sentencing includes probation. So in California, for example, a first-time DUI comes with a 3-year probation. So you get the DUI, you have pending charges. Let's say it takes a year to work itself through the court system. And then you get your 3 years of probation, right? So let's say we got 2020 DUI conviction, right? 2021 convicted, 3 years of probation, we're up to 2024, right? Plus 5 years. So you become eligible to apply for rehabilitation 9 years after you got stopped on a DUI, if you're in California with 3 years probation. I cannot overstate the importance of avoiding, if you work in this world, the importance of avoiding something like a DUI conviction is huge. That's 9 years that you need a waiver to get in. And then we file the application. The application takes a year or two to process. That's 10 or 11 years that you will need a waiver to get into Canada every time you go. So but I still heavily encourage clients, even though it sounds like it's way off and it'll never happen, the date does come around, and putting in the application for rehabilitation and getting that golden ticket, I love to say, good, we're not friends anymore, go away, because, it's really great to see clients graduate out of needing our services and have that rehabilitation. They can, if they're artists, they're up there booking as many gigs as possible. If they're working as crew or bus drivers, truck drivers, management, merch people, they're able to book as many shows as they want, and they don't have to tell somebody that they're going to maybe have a problem getting into Canada. It's great. There is a concept called deemed rehabilitation. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard people say, well, it's been more than 10 years. There's the magic 10-year line for Canada. And this is where it comes from. If a person has one conviction and it's only criminality. So you'll remember that DUIs now are considered serious criminality. So one conviction, only criminality, more than 10 years have passed since completion of sentencing. You have to have all three of those things. Then you can be considered deemed rehabilitated. So if somebody says, hey, Maggie, I just have one DUI conviction from 2010, let's say, right? That person could go to the border, and most likely the immigration authorities would say, yep, you're good. We consider you deemed rehabilitated. Sometimes with clients, we do a special application for them, which is called a determination of admissibility. And we put it in saying, hey, this person has a history, may have had to get waivers in the past, maybe in your system. And we say they are now deemed rehabilitated. And here's the paperwork to prove it. Do you agree? And we get a letter from the consulate that says that confirms that they're deemed rehabilitated, which is like having the letter that says you're rehabilitated. So that when they go to the border, they don't have to do this dance anymore. They get the letter. I don't usually recommend doing that for people who don't go to Canada often, but for clients who go to Canada a few times a year or annually and are tired of having to interact with the immigration authorities on the spot, we like to get that letter for them and help them smooth their way in, even if they are now deemed rehabilitated. Wow, I went faster than I thought. So we'll have lots of time for questions, which is great. Key takeaways. Please know that the immigration officers at the border can see what's on your FBI report. Please, 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 please encourage people who are touring to just get it, just pull it. It costs $50. It's an online application. You go and get fingerprinted. At my office, we do courtesy reviews. So if somebody sends me an FBI report and says, what do you think? I will gladly read it and get on the phone with them and have a conversation about it and talk about whether I think they need a TRP or whether they're going to be okay. This is the number one way that you can take the guesswork out of going to the border. Do not count on 10 years being passed, expungements, luck on past trips, or having had things dismissed. Really, none of those things necessarily count. I mean, here's the cautionary tale that I'm sure you're all familiar with is Charlie Crockett, who thought that enough time had passed on a recent tour and got to the border and was turned around and had to cancel the whole Canadian tour. And I don't know the details of his case. I've only just seen what's been shared online, but it happens. People get the wrong information, they make the wrong, plans, and they end up with a real mess. Back to Chip's opening line. Oops. Up. Okay. Chip's opening line. Orders are unpredictable. Orders are unpredictable. You guys seem like a pretty savvy group. I think you've all seen that crossing at one place versus another can be different. Crossing at different times of day can be different. Crossing, entering by plane versus entering on a ground crossing. Like, I am a big fan, not just because I'm an attorney, but because I want to see people not have a miserable time, of doing things in advance, the proper way, not taking a risk going to the border. And that brings me to the final takeaway. There are solutions. We get waivers for people with really gnarly histories. We can get waivers for people with really serious convictions. The times that people do not get their waivers approved are very fact specific. And I usually give people a pretty stern warning about why I think they may not get approved on that record. But waivers are possible for, I would say, 95% of people traveling in. And pretty much anyone can be rehabilitated with a proper application. So the more serious the crimes, the more serious the history, the better we have to do at stacking up the application and showing why that person is rehabilitated and won't cause problems for Canada. But there are solutions for all of this. And so instead of taking chances, I would say, take your future into your own hands and put together the applications that you need to be successful in getting into Canada smoothly. And with that, if anybody wants to take a quick gander, that's the contact information for my office, but I'm sure Ginny will also pop that into the chat for us. Where, like I said, I'm licensed in Nova Scotia, which allows me to do Canadian immigration of all sorts. I'm also licensed in California. I don't use that so much. I do not do, just to put it out there, I do not do U.S. immigration, so bringing people into the United States. I leave that to the brave U.S. immigration attorneys that I know. It's a whole different ball game. I would be happy to make introductions if anyone has a U.S. immigration question or concern. So with that, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah.
And open the floor.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That was amazing. So informative, so interesting. Two ways we can do this. I have three people who have put questions in the chat. So I'm going to call your name. I'm going to spotlight you next to Maggie, and then you can ask her your question. And then when you're done, I'll put you back in your little tile, and I'll get the next person. And then also, you can just raise your hand like Danielle's doing there. That works too, and I can call on you. So I'm going to start with Neville, or hopefully I said that right. Yeah. Neville, you can go first. I'm just going to spotlight you, and there.
Hi, Maggie. Yeah,
hey, Neville.
It was actually answered when the rehab application cost $200 to $1,000, and the TRP application $245. But since those were answered, my question would be, would you recommend we have all our drivers, with questionable, go to the fieldhouseprintusa.com prior to any attempt going in just to see?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't, if somebody says to you, look, I've never been arrested, I've never been charged with anything, then, I wouldn't put somebody through that if they really have no history. But if you have, I usually ask people, have you ever been arrested? Right? Mm-hmm. Have you ever been charged with something? Because people, despite their best intentions, they don't remember things correctly. They sometimes minimize things. They, it just, and if you're their employer, they especially just don't want to tell you all their bad news, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get an FBI report and have a look at it. And like I said, we need a few weeks to get an application together and file it. But, if we can get started on a proper timeline, we, bus drivers, truck drivers, we certainly are able to get them into Canada also. I will say, because I have you here, and I think also it was Chip who does trucking. Yep. So yep. Canada is, I will say, a little tougher on truck and bus drivers for this reason. We are usually saying this person is critical to the tour. They can't be replaced. They really have to go in. And Canada, a little bit knows that they for sure can be replaced in a lot of cases. They're not lighting designers. They're not the artist on stage. They're not the manager. Honestly, like if somebody came to me and they had, say, like several DUIs and they were a driver of some sort, I would say, let's not bother with TRPs. Let's apply for rehabilitation and get you cleared permanently, but not take a risk with trying to get a waiver. Because sometimes they'll say, well, like, you're a driver and you're replaceable, plus your exact crime relates to the thing you want to come and do in Canada, right? So those ones, like, also there's drivers who have like an old shoplifting conviction or an old.
Or I was going to add late child support.
That does not show up. That will affect people's passports. It won't show up on a FBI report. It will sometimes affect whether they get passports issued. Taxes and child support will affect passport applications.
Good to know. Good to know.
Is that it? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly.
Great.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, next we're going to do Graham Tobias.
Okay, I guess my question's in the chat earlier too. We crossed the border into Canada yesterday, and one of my truck drivers, they searched them like they're allowed to, and they found a small pocket knife that they said was illegal and detained him and almost charged him. And so I'm just wondering, is there like a list of items that are not obvious but are very illegal in Canada?
I don't know if there's a list. I would go with what you wouldn't bring on an airplane as a starting point, right? A pocket knife, I know it seems like a small thing, and especially if somebody's a driver, they might just have it in their glove compartment box or on their door, and it's just, it's more of a tool than a weapon. And 100 people probably bring pocket knives into the country, but now you know that some immigration officer is going to say that that's a weapon and nearly charge you with a concealed weapon charge. So the main rules are no drugs, please no drugs. Please, even if it was legal where you bought it and it's legal in Canada, please don't try to bring it over the border. All border crossing, this is as much for like American authorities. All American border crossings and airports are federal. Marijuana is not federally legal. Please do not take marijuana to the border or in an airport. It's not federally legal. People can restock on all their legal goodies once they get into Canada. Marijuana is legal all across the country. You can buy it all sorts of places. Do not take it with you. Do not take weapons, even if you own and are registered. Do not take firearms. People forget, or people think that they're licensed where they have them, so they're licensed where they're going. They are not. Firearms at the border will cause you a lot of trouble. As you can hear from Graham, a pocket knife can cause you a fair amount of trouble. I don't deal in the world of carnets and import, like bringing stuff into the country. There are some really great resources for stamping equipment and goods into Canada and out. I don't really deal with that, but I would say if you are a person who is bringing stuff in or taking stuff out, do have your paperwork in order, and do be aware that there's going to be duties and tax issues with bringing over merch. And so I know a lot of the bigger companies are doing like getting their merch in Canada instead of trying to bring over merch and things like that. What else? I think that's it. I think a good rule of thumb is just like something that you wouldn't take on an airplane. Don't take it to the border. Leave it behind. It's kind of cold comfort. I wish I could give you an exact list, but I will say also this. People who are entering with tours, who are entering with buses and trucks, and a lot of people, they are going to give you usually a much more, they're going to look everything over with a fine-tooth comb. It's going to be different from your experience when you're just driving up to Vancouver for a ski holiday, or up to Niagara Falls, or crossing over to Montreal for a personal holiday. If you haven't been there as part of a tour, please don't expect it to be the same as when you're going for personal travel. It's going to be different.
Yeah, the bus we had no issues with. It was super easy. We were at a different crossing, but I guess we just got unlucky.
I think you just got, unfortunately, you did just get unlucky. And unfortunately, it just kind of proves Chip's opening. It's gonna be all
Yeah.
points to ship today. The borders are unpredictable, and you just don't know. Leave a lot of time. I guess that's the other thing. I usually try to encourage people, leave as much time as possible between when you're, crossing the border to when you're expected to be where you're going on the other side, so that you can eat it if you have to spare a few hours.
Yeah, I will say we did use merch from Canada, and we did use a brokerage and a bond, and that made it all really easy for that side of it.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. No, my pleasure.
Okay, next we're gonna go to Danny with an I.
Hi, Maggie. Can you hear me?
I can. Hey, Danny.
Hey, thank you. I think you and I were chatting a little bit on Facebook a couple weeks ago, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to mention, so I have a copy of this. I'm going on tour into Canada, planning to go on tour into Canada for 3 shows in Toronto and Montreal. And the person that is in this group has sent me a copy of their TRP that they do have already. I guess since their incident happened, they've been to Canada on a couple tours already.
Yeah.
So just looking at this, it looks like the TRP is valid until May 1st. We exit Canada on April 30th. So on my end as a tour manager, it's just a Sprinter van tour. There's 4 of us total. It's really small. Is there anything additional I would need to do, or just having this document with us at the border when we arrive? Is that good enough?
Is the document you're looking at, does it have their picture on it, or is it just a letter type document?
It's a letter type document with a UCI number.
Okay, so what I think you have is the approval letter.
Mm-hmm.
Basically says you have been approved for a temporary resident permit, and says like entry on this date, valid to that date. So that's the approval letter. And when you get to the border, give yourself a little extra time. You're going to give them that letter, their passport, and 2 passport photos, just like any like Walgreens, Walmart passport photos. They're going to issue the actual permit at the border when you go in. It may take a little extra time. They'll have to go to secondary processing, but it's been approved. So they're just going to like whoop, whoop the paperwork and give you back a document that has your person's photo on it.
Okay. If, I can chat with this person too, because apparently they also just went to Canada like sometime in the last month. Is that something that they would have, if that happened when they just went there? Is that something they would already have, or is it
They
something
should have it. I mean, if they gave the approval letter and got the permit issued on an earlier trip, like in the last few weeks, they should have that permit, and they should be bringing that permit with them back to the border.
Cool. So it'll have their photo, and I can just ask
it should, yeah. What you're looking for is a document. It's a single page document that looks kind of official, but has their photo on it.
Okay, cool. Sweet. Yeah, this is my first time having to deal with this, so I'm like, I don't know. Okay. You kind of mentioned as well that you don't really deal with carnets that much, but I guess I'm just, in my experience of just doing single van tours, I've been successfully able to do that without a carnet over the last 8 years or so. And then it seems like now it's becoming more necessary. I mean, and there were times I did have a carnet and the border agents didn't even seem to know what it was. And now on my last tour in the fall, it was the first time I'd ever been asked for one. Right. So I'm just, most of our gear is going to be rented. So we don't have a lot of that in yet that's going to be on a carnet, I guess. But does this just seem like moving forward, it's like the way to go, kind of like always a carnet for a van tour?
And like I said, it's not my area, so I'm a little bit talking out of my ass, frankly. Yeah. If you're worried that you're going to have a problem, get the carnet. That's the golden standard. If you would rather just like make an Excel spreadsheet with what you've got in the van, and you said, hey, we're just coming up with like these 10 things, everything else is rented. They may say, that's great, see you. Or they may say, turn around and go get that stamped, right? Yeah. So yeah. I think it kind of just depends on whether you want to like spend a little extra money and time and have an easier time going through, or whether you want to do an easier thing on the front end and take the risk of it becoming more complicated on the way in.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I was gonna get one anyways. I just was like,
I mean, like, I'm not gonna. I won't say don't bother. I will say that sometimes with smaller things, it doesn't. It seems anecdotally not to be required, but back to Graham saying his guy got in a lot of trouble for a pocket knife. Like you just
Yeah.
never know. You never know who's going to be there and who's going to make your life miserable.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the help with everything. This has been so helpful. Thanks.
And my pleasure. Nice to see you too.
All right, next we'll go with Hazel and then Lucas.
Hi, Maggie. Thank
Hey,
you so
Hazel, how
much
you
for
doing?
taking your time to do this for us. My question, I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer, but I'll ask anyway.
Sure.
I'm soon moving over to Vancouver from the UK on an IEC visa,
Mhm.
and I am wondering, while I'm in Canada on the IEC, am I eligible for P1s or O2s in the States while I have that
That I
state?
couldn't answer. I mean, I would say that so the IEC will let you work in Canada, which is great. And you can do lots of local stuff and get lots of local expertise. But to come in and do any of that work in the United States, please, please be sure you have a P1 or an O1 or an O2. And those are all US visas that require that you have a job offer. They take weeks, sometimes months to process. They're taking longer and longer to process. So, I mean, me personally, if you've got the IEC and you can come in and do a bunch of stuff in Canada, I would just go in and enjoy yourself in Canada. And if you want to start, if you find a band that you love working with or something and they want to bring you to the US, please get like way ahead of it, 2 or 3 months ahead of it. It's not something
Right.
that's to be easier fast.
Right.
But the opportunity, obviously is there. But IEC is great. That's a great opportunity to go work a bunch of stuff in Canada.
Sure. So there's no conflict necessarily. Is it just like a status change?
I don't believe so. I mean, you're not required to stay in Canada only, and as long as you're as long as you have the right work permit to go into the United States to work, you could also do that. You're just using up the time that your IEC is valid for, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also another question. I know it's not necessarily related to border crossing, but when I look to extend my stay at the end of the IEC, which is looking very likely at the moment, I understand the self-employed program is paused, and I would be going over there as a freelancer. Would my best route be to go through the provincial nominee program to extend the stay?
That's you're getting into stuff that I actually just don't do.
Sure.
But if you want, I can connect you. You've got my email. Drop me a line, and we'll figure out who you can talk to in Canada that could help you with that. Because it's just you're outside of my wheelhouse now, and I don't want to give you bad advice. There's lots of options of how you could extend it, but you need to talk to somebody who's doing that more regularly than me.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. I will. Yeah, if did you drop your email?
I'll pop it in there again. It's probably up in the chat somewhere, but I'll just pop it in. Make sure I don't
Amazing.
type
I'll drop you an email.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
Hazel. Quickly, we're going to go to Lucas and then we'll wrap this up.
Hey, thanks, Maggie. This has been awesome, super helpful. Just one quick question. A couple years ago, I did a tour with a handful of dates in Canada, primarily a U.S. tour, a few handful of dates in Canada, but we were in and out a few times. So obviously it was on the routing. Everyone we hired, obviously we said like you got to be able to get in and out of Canada, no border issues. First time we went in and out, no problem. Second time we got held up because somebody, the same crew, but the second time different border people, they weren't having it. We got held up for a bunch of hours, and eventually that person just didn't get in, and that was a whole scramble. So I'm just wondering, is there anything we can do? Like, I'm sure there's privacy things in place that restrict what we can do, but as tour and production managers, is there anything we can do prior to a tour to like do our background checks? Because like this person clearly wasn't upfront enough to not have that happen. So like, is there anything we can do preventative?
I mean, there's not. Yes, no. as an employer, you can hire an employment, like people who do employer background checks. You could do those. The fact is that what shows up on an employer-based background check may be different and somewhat sanitized from what shows up on an immigration background check, because of how expungements and other things work. So a thing that might still be a problem for Canada may not show up on an employer background check. I think honestly, it's just asking the right questions ahead of time. Like I said, I think a lot of people don't remember details, and they really think like, oh, I only had a misdemeanor, or oh, it was a long time ago, or oh, I thought that was expunged. And so even though you've clearly said, are you going to have a problem getting into Canada? They have heard, do you have a recent felony conviction? And if it's no, they're like, I'm going to be fine. And they're not fine. And then you have exactly the problem you had. So I oftentimes encourage production managers, tour managers to ask, have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been fingerprinted? If you have, go pull your FBI report. They don't even have to show it to you. You can have them pull it and send it directly to me, and I will take a look at it and only talk to them and tell them what the situation is, because I'm sure there's nobody that actually on purpose wants to have a problem at the border and let down their employer and be embarrassed and be the guy that holds you up. But a lot of people just don't remember, don't know, are unclear, and now are embarrassed because it's like their employment plus their reputation plus the stupid thing they did 15 years ago. You know, I think the easiest thing is just to highly encourage anybody who's ever been fingerprinted to please get an FBI report. They don't have to give it to you. They can just give it directly to me. You know, I will maintain confidentiality with them, have a conversation with them, say, you know, this is what I see. This is what the risks are. You know, it's not a guarantee, but I think it's a better path forward than having people like rely on their own, you know, judgment of whether they think, you know, I'll put it this way. I went to law school for a lot of years and I practiced law for a lot of years. And so I feel confident telling people whether or not they're going to have a problem getting into Canada. And maybe people who haven't done that maybe have a lesser understanding of what the risks are.
I guess the follow-up would be, because I know like when people are interviewing for jobs and stuff, there's certain limits on questions you can ask them. So there's no legal implications of saying, hey, do you have any, like any prior arrests or anything like that?
As an employer?
Yeah, or even if it's like hiring a freelancer, 1099
yeah,
stuff.
I mean, you do have to be, in this case, and I'm getting like tiptoeing into employment law, which is state by state and like all sorts of protected areas of, who's, people's histories and identities. But I think in this case, asking people about arrest and conviction history is a requirement to do the job, right? If you cannot get into Canada and you've been hired for the tour, then I think it's a relevant question to the employment. But I think in a perfect world, if I were an employer, I would say, try to communicate that you'll work with them to help them get into that the purpose of asking in advance is to direct them to somebody who can help them get in, not to just cut them from being hired. Right. I think that's the other problem, is that people think if they say yes, then they're just not going to get hired and they won't get the gig. Right. And we work a lot. In the last few years, we developed some really good relationships with like the third party production companies, the lighting companies, the special effects companies, the tour bus companies, who, they'll send us their people directly. They're like, we want to hire this person. We want to send them out on a bunch of shows. Like, take a look at their FBI report. Please get them, please help them get squared away so that we can confidently send them out on shows. So it's, I think increasingly understanding that a lot of this is resolvable. A lot of these problems can be solved, and communicating that way with employees, that you intend to hire them if you can, but we need to make sure that you're going to get in smoothly and not hold up the tour.
Right? Awesome. Great. That's super helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And just to reiterate, I think Chip has added like a great point to finish things off here. Border officers are asking questions they already know the answers to. Absolutely. Have you ever been charged with a DUI? They're not asking out of nowhere. They're asking because they can see that you have been. So, the rule of thumb at the border is be honest, be polite, be chill. Immigration officers can turn anyone around anytime. The only people they have to let into Canada are Canadian citizens. Absolutely anybody else can be turned around on vibes, frankly, right? If you show up and you are nasty and rude and uncooperative, they will not give you the time of day. They will turn you around. Like, they are not playing at the border if you catch the wrong person. My pleasure. It was great to be here. I'm happy that we were hopefully able to help people today, and like, we're always happy to help people going forward. The website, Mundial Law, it has a resource page. It has downloadables about inadmissibility, about visas, ETAs. It has a link to getting your FBI report and the info sheet. So everything I've put on here is available at the website, is what I'm saying. And then also, if you have questions about any of this, please reach out. We're here to help. Like, you guys have your expertise. This is my expertise. I love to see people get into Canada and have their jobs and play their shows and, not have a nasty time at the border. So we're happy to hear from you anytime.